Welcome back to My Trauma's Chronic but I'm Iconic, where we're diving deep into the world of neurodiversity, inclusion, and the incredible work being done by a passionate advocate like Anima Nair. Anima is a true force in the field of neuroinclusion, an inspiring TEDx speaker, neurodiversity advocate, and an organizational leader empowering autistic young people through art-based vocational training. In this conversation, Anima shares her personal journey, her experience raising an autistic son, and the pivotal moment that shaped her advocacy work. Also explore the transformative power of inclusion in workplaces, education, and communities, and the practical steps we can all take to make the world a more accessible place for neurodivergent individuals. This episode is packed with insightful and actionable advice, so grab yourself a cup of tea, get cozy, and settle in for a thought-provoking discussion that is sure to leave you feeling inspired. Before we dive in, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe so we can continue doing the important work that we're doing, making a lasting impact on the world. Now let's get started. Tell me a bit about yourself and your background.
So I'm Amina Nair, and I live in Bangalore, India. So I'm a neurodiversity advocate, and what I do is I advocate for neuro-inclusion in organizations and communities and so on. My educational background has been sort of mixed. I was a physics major who then went on to engineering college to do a master's in computer applications, and I worked briefly in software. And later on, after my son was born, and a few years later, when he was diagnosed with autism, I sort of changed track and decided to work with him for a few years, and then co-founded an NGO. And post that, I've been devoting myself to being a neurodiversity advocate, completely and totally. So that's me.
What inspired your initial interest in advocating for neurodiversity?
Well, the truth is that when my son Prana was diagnosed with autism, I had heard of autism, but I really did not know much about it. And 20 years ago in Bangalore, there was really very little awareness about it in India in general. So I had to sort of forge a path for him as well as myself to navigate this journey through autism. And that's when I figured out that not enough people are talking about it. There is just way too much stigma attached to it. And it took me a long time, quite a few years, to grow into acceptance myself, and also to start seeing autism as, part of his identity instead of as something wrong with him. Because as parents, we are first exposed to the medical model where everything is, pathologized, sorry. And therefore, you would just always look at, okay, this is not right. This, we need to fix this. We need to work on this. And slowly, my vision changed. My view of autism changed because I began seeing Pranav as some, in a wider lens. And that is when I realized how few people are actually thinking along those lines in India, and how important it is to start talking about it, to write about it, to use any platform possible to spread this idea that all of these variations that we see in human brains are natural, and therefore, all neurodivergent individuals are an integral part of society. That is the part that I keep talking about wherever I go.
How has your personal journey as a parent to an autistic young man shaped your approach to inclusion?
I think it gave me a very clear idea. I mean, I could see what my son was going through. It was really hard on him. It was hard on me as well. It's not only the child who gets diagnosed, who then has to live life in a certain way. But in India, especially, even the parents have to live life in a certain way. You can't just, pop off to the neighbors for a cup of tea. There is no one moment in my life when he was growing up when I wasn't constantly hyper vigilant, like always thinking, okay, what is he up to now? What do I have to keep an eye on now? I could never relax. I'm not sure I'm explaining it very clearly, but it was a constant state of stress. So that really changes you. It changes, it affects your health, your mental health, your physical health, the whole your life is changed by that. Until you come to terms with it, it's very difficult to live such an existence. But you do have to go through all those stages before you grow into acceptance. And, after that, I believe at least the things started opening up. Believe me, without awareness, without social support, without the infrastructure, without a larger family to support you through all this, it is very difficult. They say it takes a village to raise a child. And in the case of an autistic child, a neurodivergent child, you need more than a village. And very frequently, you are by yourself. I did have help from my immediate family, but on a day-to-day basis, the stress, the pain, the heartache, the tears, all of that was just for me and my son.
Could you share some early experience that clarified the need for greater neuro-inclusion in society?
Well, everywhere, I went with Pranav as a child. Like, for instance, if you're when I was trying to get him into school, nobody seemed to see him for who he is. They only saw the things that he couldn't do. They never could see that this child was full of life. He loved everybody. He wanted so badly to be part of a group of children, Nobody saw his plus points, his strengths. Everybody was just telling me, but he can't do word problems, or he can't, talk as clearly, or his communication is not effective. To point out only the deficits of an individual constantly and forcefully, it takes away that individual's ability to see themselves in a better light. So the negative impact of that is huge. And unfortunately, Pranav had a lot of that growing up from environments that were outside the house, even sometimes in the house, to be honest, because not every generation looks at autism the same way. You may have a certain worldview. Other people older than you may not have that worldview. And it would always be about, why isn't he doing this? Why can't he do this right? It's when you look at it that way, there is just, how do I say it? It was really an emotional, difficult journey. And his experience, especially with the initial years of trying to find a good educational setting for him, that's where I experienced the most exclusion on his behalf, I would say. But that's where we saw the need for an environment that understood him and that recognized him for who he was, and where his strengths could be, could grow instead of his deficits be emphasized.
Yeah, I feel like school is the first systematic failure of most children's lives.
Yes.
The place that are supposed to be understanding, it's supposed to be nurturing and caring, is
Yeah.
often not. And you're like, because my child, I don't have a child, but I'm autistic, myself,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and I have ADHD, because I'm autistic, doesn't mean just because I might not be able to follow certain social cues or
Yeah.
do certain things, doesn't mean I won't excel in my subjects or won't
Right.
excel in extracurricular. You know,
Mm-hmm.
every child have their own strengths, and it's the responsibility of parents and primary caregivers, as well as schools or education or other individuals in a child's life, to find that potential, to find that and nurture it.
Yes.
Every child has a potential to flourish. it
Mm-hmm.
it's an individual's, I feel like it's those who are surrounding it to realize it and show the child, you have the potential and you can do this. It
Right.
doesn't make them any less of a child or any less capable or any less clever. It's
Yes.
just it just shows in a different way.
Absolutely. Yes.
And they're so intimidated by the difference.
Yes. It's Differences are scary for people who don't choose the path of understanding.
Mm.
Right? Anything different from me is scary for me, and I don't want to delve deep in. So I rely on shortcuts mentally. I go back to my prejudices, I go back to my biases, because they protect me from danger, right? Then I don't have to interact with somebody or something I do not know. So it's a very deep, deep-seated, thing within human beings.
Absolutely. And you know what? I don't. And the thing is, another branding that often autistic people with, special educational needs or, disabilities have is you're difficult to work with. Their needs may be complex, but they're not difficult to work with.
Right, right.
And I feel like people lose the understanding. I've mentioned this multiple times on my podcast. If you're a baby and you start screaming and stuff like that, perfectly fine. If
No
you
problem.
have dementia and you're like your late 60s to 80s or whatever, acceptable. In that period after from 3 to, I don't know, 65, 70 is
Yeah.
unacceptable to be
Yeah.
what you are.
So that is, again, like you said, it's because of the serious lack of understanding. If you're only looking at behaviors and
Hmm.
you're analyzing the behavior superficially without seeing what the behavior is trying to communicate, you will never understand that person, right? We're talking about an autistic child put in an environment which is noisy, where the light is bright, and then you're asking that child, because in India, frequently classrooms have 35 children, 40 children. We're expecting that child to focus, answer questions, respond appropriately, sit in
Hmm.
this noisy classroom and function, which is well nigh impossible. But
Hmm.
look at the environment and then see how on earth a child who is autistic and who has sensory difficulties is going to manage. Just
Exactly.
because it's invisible doesn't mean it's not there. Just means
That,
you cannot see it, right? The only way sometimes I feel changing people's minds is to give them an immersive experience about what it is like to
yeah.
be autistic, maybe put on headphones and have blast like really loud music and then talk to them and give them very complicated instructions and then say you have 5 minutes to respond to this and then see how they'll take it. I mean, the point that I'm trying to make is really, if we don't open up our minds and hearts, we are not going to have the empathy, enough empathy so that we understand what, especially neurodivergent children, because I've seen them suffer the most, what they're going through. It sticks with them as adults as well. We have so many consequences of this exclusion that children and individuals are experiencing on a daily basis.
Absolutely. I think it's often, I feel like the National Autistic Society, an organization in the UK, they've done a video where somebody's going through a shopping centre and it's
Yeah.
showing it what it would look like through the eyes and sensory aspects of somebody with autism.
Oh, brilliant.
They've done a really, really good job. But I feel like sometimes it, people need to understand, like, for a child, who's um neurotypical,
Hmm.
and they find a 35-person classroom very overwhelming.
Yeah.
So why
Yeah.
would you expect somebody with neurodivergence to, and I feel like, both, even let's just say, but a neurodivergent person and a neurotypical person reacts the exact same way. We know which one is going to get condemned.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
absolutely, like, an awful thing to go through. Um,
Yeah.
how do you balance, how do you balance, your personal experience with professional advocacy and your personal experience with professional advocacy? How do you balance that?
Uh, well, for me, it's easy enough to balance because I have a lot of flexibility in the way I work. Also, for me, personal professional identities in this case are very much tied together because my understanding of neurodiversity came from my understanding of my son. So the personal element is very strong there. And when we talk about professional advocacy, I feel that instead of, I'm neurodivergent myself. Actually, I found that out very late in life in 2023 when when I was working in an education project and one of the individuals who was working with us in the team told me after just 8 minutes of interaction with me that you do know you're autistic, right? And then I just kept quiet. I said, oh, like it didn't occur to me because she's very experienced. She's an autistic ADHD herself, and this is what she does for a living. She's really experienced with working with neurodivergent individuals. And I thought, oh, I didn't realize that. I mean, I knew that all my life I felt like I didn't fit in, but it didn't occur to me because, even for me, the stereotypical notion of autism is very different. So
Mm.
I had no idea as a woman how I experience autism or as what autism could look like, right? What are the other ways that autism could look like? Because believe me, there is such a gap in understanding of that. It's
Yeah.
very different. Geographically speaking, culturally speaking, it's quite different when you analyze all of those. different aspects, and then look at neurodivergence through that lens. So now, after my son's experience, I was thinking, even on a more personal level, I also had realized that my experiences reflected this as well. So it actually boosted my understanding, and I believe I'm a very effective neurodiversity advocate because of this. So it ties in together.
With, being a parent,
Yeah.
a young man, as well as, being autistic yourself, how has these experiences influenced your perspective on the systematic barriers neurodivergent individuals face?
Uh, But the barriers, we could talk about barriers all day long. There are so many barriers because, by definition, we know that neurodivergent individuals form a minority. The majority of individuals in this world are neurotypical. So everything in the world, right, every system, every process, every practice, every policy, everything is designed mostly by neurotypicals for neurotypicals, right? So by design, you will be disabled in a world that is primarily neurotypical. So having said that, if you're going to specifics, like I said, schools, for me, the school experience was not very bad. I mean, I used to excel at everything. Not everything academically in school, which is possibly why I never thought of myself as being different academically. But I also had great difficulty with relationships. Like I would take everything literally. And now when I look back, I'm saying, how did I not know, at least somewhere in my head, that I was neurodivergent? Because I would take everything literally and things like that. So when we say schools, we talk about workplaces. Workplaces, the way people expect you to work certain number of hours, and the way instructions are given to employees, for instance, all of those are barriers, because using complicated language, having interview processes that compel you, for instance, to have eye contact, to make social chit chat, etc. That's another barrier. Environmental barriers in the workspace, in schools, in public spaces, those are barriers. There are barriers everywhere. When I was taking my son out in Bangalore, I was thinking, where do I take him to? When he was a small child and his sensory difficulties were way more intense because he slowly got desensitized to a lot of them. It was very difficult to take him to a public space because it would invariably be noisy. There would be no accommodations made for a child who would be doing this, covering his ears because of the noise. He wanted to be around people, but he couldn't deal with noise. He couldn't deal with, those flashing lights that would trigger seizures and so on. So to find a place where I could just sit with my son and not have to worry every second, that was just, I never had that experience while he was small and growing up. But now, of course, things have changed a lot, not in terms of public spaces, but I know now where to go and, how to find spaces that are more or less friendly for him and so on. So barriers can be really, there are so many different kinds of barriers that we can talk about when it comes to, being a neurodivergent in a neurotypical world.
One of the experiences that you had in your professional career was being the director at NeuroGifted. What was the
Yes.
most transformative experience during your time there?
Uh, there are, when you say transformative, for me, when I was a co-founder of an NGO before that, I was working with young, let's say young adults as well as teenagers, who were autistic. And over there, the way that, we talked about autism, the terminology used, let me be specific. The terminology used was really more medical model based than social model based. So when I started working in the neurodiversity space, for me, the hugely transformative part was meeting neurodivergent adults. I had not met neurodivergent adults before. I was always, dealing with youngsters. So when I met them and when they said that many of them had issues with their parents because of the way the parents talked about them, right? But the way the parents made it all about their journey and their pain, and not thinking about the way their words affected their children, how the children were taken from therapy to therapy without their, willingness. They were not taken willingly. All of these stories really made me open my eyes to the fact that so many children like my son were not given the choice, right? How we take away the dignity to risk, we take away the right to choice unknowingly because as parents we're being protected. So that was one transformational thought. And when you say professionally, in one of my training sessions, it was upwards of 1,000 people in the training session. One individual, and it was a virtual session, raises their hand and says at the end of the awareness session that now I feel like I'm in a safe space. So let me just tell all of you that I am neurodivergent and I've been in this company for X number of years and I've never said this aloud to anyone because I thought it was going to affect my career, my future. But now, today, I feel safe enough to stand up and say this. For me, that was a real transformative moment because it showed me the possibilities. Imagine if we could create safe spaces where everybody could come and say, talk about what it is that they need, so what kind of support they need. They can reveal their identities to the extent they want to reveal it. They can feel a sense of belonging because they're safe, they're protected, nobody's going to judge them. That's the kind of change we need to see in workspaces and in society in general. So those were for me transformative experiences.
What lessons did you take from, your decade of working with autistic young people?
Uh, a lot of lessons actually. The children and all those, our teenagers, our young men. Uh, I could see that, despite what the world thought, our children needed connection. They really, really, what they needed was to be not isolated, to be not ghettoized, to not be pushed under the carpet and forgotten. They wanted connection, they wanted to go out, they wanted to go to like a restaurant or play bowling, go for a bowling thing just like other children. They actually, even if they wanted to have relationships, like dating or whatever, in like, at least in India, when I see within the autism communities, parents don't generally, I mean, this is not something that we talk about their sexual needs or things like that. So some of the lessons that I learned was that, first of all, always do not presume that autistic individuals want to live in a world of their own in isolation. Many children, many individuals do want, if not direct interaction, at least to be around people. It is a need. It is a human need. It's not an autistic need. Then I also realized that our children, when given the right environment, our autistic children flourish. They do things that, I won't use the word inspiring because I am tired of hearing the word inspiring. It's unfair to use that word. And what I'm trying to say is their strengths are there if the environment is the right one to bring about, the flourishing of those strengths. If you put, a plant in the wrong environment, like for instance, I'm a terrible gardener, and I am very good with fruit trees. I'm not good with potted plants. So I had a couple of rose plants, and my sister was a great gardener. She comes by and says, these plants are really not doing well. They don't have flowers. They're wilting. All the leaves are falling off. And she said, it's because your terrace faces the west. Let's move them to the east where they get the eastern sun. And in no time at all, and I'm like maybe in 3 days, all of my plants were like, they had so many new baby leaves, like up to 20 leaves per plant, just because they were set in the right environment. We're talking about just creating the right conditions for someone to thrive. So in my years of working with autistic children, that is one of my biggest lessons. If you give them the right environment, if you encourage, if you foster, if you celebrate differences, then you can see a lot of change for the better without having to, make them some version of neurotypical. You can see the strengths within them grow. I think that is one of the most powerful lessons that I've learned.
Amazing. Absolutely powerful to hear. Can you share a success story from your advocacy work that deeply resonates with you, that has, motivated you to keep on going with the work that you're doing?
I would know whether there would be a single success story. For me, it was a success experience, I would say. Um, the thing is, I've done a lot of awareness sessions and training. And one of those, I wouldn't say, one of those sessions, let's say, was with a company that deals with built environments. So it's a fairly large company. So they had not thought, when they were talking accessibility, and we're talking about creating built environments, not working in an inclusive environment. So creating a built environment that is inclusive and accessible for neurodivergent individuals. So that was the brief. They had never actually thought about it. They had not even realized what it was like for a neurodivergent individual to live in a space that is designed without taking into account their needs. Like, if you have wayfinding in a space that is not clear, how does a neurodivergent individual then navigate within that space? If you don't have, certain colors, if you have colors that are harsh, or lighting that is harsh, or, textures that make it difficult for you to navigate the space, all of those things. No, they had not really thought about things like that. So when we talked about it, when my mentor and I, we had a couple of sessions with them, and we said, these are the things that, really help create an inclusive built environment. Like if you have a lot of greenery in the space, if you have natural light, if you're using natural materials when you're creating the space, all of that has a huge impact. So I think that those people, they really, really took it to heart. And we got the feedback that this was truly, truly impactful for them. So the next time around, when they created a lookbook to share with us, it was amazing. I mean, and this building is not ready yet, but they have each floor dedicated to each of your senses. So they've designed it around the senses to such a degree that, I was feeling really proud of the fact that not only did they listen, they really explored it and created something that would be truly inclusive as a space, truly accessible as a space for neurodivergent individuals, which is very rare, especially in India.
Often the work that you do, any work to do with neurodivergence and neurodiversity is often very much emotionally demanding. How do you handle that?
I think my years of experience as a parent has helped me handle that quite effectively. The very fact that I am privileged to talk about this now, that I can talk about this, that all the challenges that my son and I have faced have actually become lessons that I can draw on to then help other people, navigate this landscape of neurodiversity a little bit better. That is, I would say, a blessing in itself. It's a privilege to have the opportunity to leverage your personal experience and then make this path a little bit easier for somebody else. So, yeah.
Some of the recent work that you've done or continue to do is go to, do TEDx. That's an absolutely massive, accomplishment. And it's something, we will link down in the show description so people can go check it out.
Yeah.
What message do you aim to convey in your TEDx talks? And why did you choose that particular focus?
Why did I choose the focus is very easy. I live and breathe neurodiversity. This is something that drives me, not for monetary benefit or for fame or anything like that. I need the word about neurodiversity to get out, because unless we realize that we're all in this together, that all the differences, the natural variations of our brains are just there because of a reason, that we have something called cognitive compatibility, that your cognition style, my cognition style, somebody else's cognition style, actually, in the larger sense, if you look at the bigger picture, all of this works together beautifully. It's like being part of a symphony, like an orchestral performance. When we realize that, that is when, we truly appreciate the beauty of neurodiversity. So the reason I chose this for my TED talk was because I thought that TEDx talk rather is because I thought that the TEDx platform would allow me to spread the awareness of neurodiversity in a much bigger way than I have been doing, so far. Because when you tell stories, you actually touch hearts. When you talk about the essential oneness of everything, it may sound like philosophy, but for me, it is truth. If we realize that, tweaking this one experience actually impacts a lot of other experiences, it's like it just emphasizes how interconnected we all are as human beings. And the reason I wanted to emphasize this is changing the way we look at neurodivergent individuals will change the way they experience the world as well, because now they don't have to feel like they are less than, like they are inferior, like they don't belong, right? They or we, I mean, rather, neurodivergent individuals should not be made to feel like they don't belong just because they're different. If instead of separating out people into silos, I'm just saying expand your hearts and minds and create wider openings, make it bigger so everybody can fit in. Think universal instead of specific. And we will have better solutions, we'll have more effective solutions.
How did you feel stepping onto the TEDx stage, and what was the preparation process like?
I was very nervous because there hadn't been a dry run, so I was not familiar with the stage. My clicker wasn't working in the beginning. There were a lot of little glitches. So yes, initially I was a little shaken, but once I started talking about what I love to talk about, it was smooth sailing from there. The preparation was a little difficult for me because I had so much to say. When all you do is think about this all day long, you want to tell the world so much, right? So for me to reduce that into, like, compress it into an 18-minute window was challenging. And it was a long cherished desire for me to be a TEDx speaker, because I've often like just looked on in awe at so many speakers. I've learned so much from other TED speakers and TEDx speakers. So for me, I did not, want to dim that aura even a little bit. I really wanted to give it my best and give it my all, and be able to talk about neurodiversity the way I feel about it. So yes, that was a tricky part.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard that you have to like memorize what you have to say. Is that
But
true?
it depends on, it's not true. I mean, I didn't memorize what I had to say, but it's good for you to have an idea, very clear idea of what you have to say, because it's timed. You need to, restrict yourself to an 18-minute window. So if you want to communicate effectively, you have to make sure that your flow is right, that you've
Mm.
got a beginning, a middle, and ending, an impactful beginning and impactful conclusion, right? And you have to hold the audience interest for that amount of time. And yes, it's great if you can memorize it, but I'm not going to scare anybody by saying that you have to memorize it, because what happens if you blank out somewhere in the middle? What is required is that you be very comfortable with what you intend to say, and that you truly, truly, truly believe in what you say, so that it doesn't matter whether you forget the fancy words because I love fancy words. Okay, so I was crafting these beautiful, delightful sentences, and it flew out of my head, halfway within my TED talk. But the emotion is genuine, and if you have genuine emotion to propel you forward, the words will come, and then you don't have to worry about it.
How did sharing your story on a global platform like TEDx change your perspective on advocacy?
I realize that a lot of people now are resonating with this. A lot of people want to know more about neurodiversity. I have received so many messages of support, of appreciation, of congratulations, because even more than I thought, people are ready to listen to this story of neurodiversity, of how neurodiversity is as essential to human beings as biodiversity is to nature, how this is the natural way of being, how nobody who is different needs to also be inferior and shut out of the world. So this message, I think, this is the right time for the message. So many people have, shared that in many ways they have felt this in their lives, or they have seen it for their children, or that they always felt this way but did not have the words to convey it. So I feel that, it's sort of it's sort of hit its mark in that sense.
Were there any surprising reactions to your TEDx talk that stood out to you?
Well, I have had a few messages saying that the talk made them cry, which I didn't expect that. I mean, I did deliver it with emotion because though I think of myself as an intellectual, I'm mostly emotional, is what I mean, that would be a better description of me. So I didn't realize that me talking about my truth and my son's truth would touch somebody else so intensely that, that the tears would come. But I've had more than a few messages telling me that. So yeah, that was surprising.
What person, when you're doing like massive things like this with global impact, through the process of preparing and delivering, there must have been a personal growth.
Yeah.
What personal growth did you experience through that process?
I think the personal growth, I'm not sure that it can be put in, in very neat, specific terms. I think the personal growth was in maybe realizing that this journey is, whatever experiences I had was more impactful than I gave it credit for. And that the advocacy, the advocacy that I started with is something that is deeply important, not only to me, but to a lot of other people. And that talking about this on a platform like TEDx meant that other people could start talking about it as well. There are many parents out there. There are many neurodivergent individuals and allies of neurodivergent individuals out there who needed to hear words like this so that, they could also go out and talk about it. So for me, my personal growth is in cementing the decision to go out and talk about this even more. I mean, I'm going to shout from the rooftops from now on. Now I feel that whatever I've been feeling and whatever I've gone through all this while, it's very tangible. It's got very tangible impact, and I need to further that impact by having more conversations with a wider set of people and really trying to impact change on the ground. So my personal growth is my desire to fuel more change on the ground.
If given another opportunity to talk at TEDx, what new angles or topics would you explore in your talk?
I would talk about intersectionality. I think that's a very important aspect. That's what I would highlight.
Mm.
And definitely, I want to do another TEDx talk because whenever I see it, I'm thinking, oh, goodness, I could have done this better and that. So I really want to have another go. I know it can't be there for another 2 years, but I do hope they give me an opportunity to come back.
I'm sure they will because, it's just how passionate you are is amazing. Often the word intersectionality is often associated with the Western world in terms of there's, much is, in India, there's a diverse amount of people. I do agree, there's different peoples of different, parts of India, different languages, different religions. I don't like this word, but, of course, caste comes into
Yes,
play
yes,
to it, whether we
yes.
like it or not. So, but it's often associated with the Western world because there's often dual nationalities or
Great.
parents from
Yeah.
different country immigrants and stuff like that. So, how does intersectionality look like in India?
Well, like you rightly said, intersectionality in India does include religion, caste, community, economic background. Of course, we have gender and sexuality as well. Uh, but intersectionality is not really talked about as much over here. It's not considered as much because, I mean, I'm not really sure why it's not. Perhaps the conversations haven't started yet. But without the lens of intersectionality, we do not recognize people's experiences enough, and we don't recognize that their identities are both multifaceted and interconnected, which is why we really do need to look at neurodiversity and neuroinclusion through the lens of intersectionality in general, like even across the board.
How do you see the impact of a TEDx talk contributing to broader neurodiversity advocacy efforts?
Well, I certainly hope that that there will be stronger advocacy efforts, in the sense that I hope that hearing somebody talk about it will fuel more people to talk about it. It'll sort of compel people to bring these conversations out in the open, that there will be less stigma associated with it when a mother gets on stage and talks about her son openly in a society where many people do not want to share the fact that their son or daughter, or maybe neurodivergent, their child may be neurodivergent. So when somebody stands up and says all of this out in the open, the hope is that there will be more advocacy from neurodivergent individuals themselves as well, because now they can stand up and talk honestly about their experiences as well. At least that is the hope, right? And even like we were talking about intersectionality and all that, the impact of different cultures, different geographies and all that, it cannot be understated. Like autism in India does not look anything like autism in the West looks like, right? And there are so many reasons for it. So I'm hoping conversations that throw light on why it is that way. Why are we stigmatizing a natural variation of human cognition instead of just providing the right accommodations and right support mechanisms in the right environment? Why do we choose that path? So all of these important questions need to be talked about, and more advocacy will bring all of this out in the open.
One thing that autistic people or young people suffer with when they go to workplace is true inclusivity in in their place of work. What
Yeah.
specific changes do you believe are necessary for creating ugh, what specific changes do you believe are necessary for creating truly inclusive workplaces?
Well, there are lots of things I can talk about, but the very first one has to be awareness. You need to know what you don't know in order to understand where to go from there. If you are completely unaware of something called neurodiversity, you cannot really start implementing an inclusive workspace. So the first thing, of course, is education awareness. You need a lot of top managerial support, like you need strategic leadership to support, like you need buy-in from the top leaders. Because if you don't have that buy-in from the top leaders, this will not trickle down. This will just be another, checkbox activity. So awareness is important. Before that, buy-in from top leadership is important. And then, we move to actual practical strategies. How can you implement neuro-inclusion in the workplace? For instance, in a hiring program, how can you improve your interview process to be more inclusive? Like, we know what a traditional interview looks like, right? It feels a little bit like an interrogation at times, one person asking questions or a bunch of people asking questions. And imagine a neurodivergent person who finds it difficult to make eye contact, or who fidgets, because you can't sit still for too long. Imagine the impression that creates in a traditional interview environment. Imagine somebody getting a resume that has, a lot of spelling mistakes or something like that. So all of that, the traditional approach to hiring needs to change. You need to offer alternatives. You need maybe, offer someone the chance to demonstrate their skill instead of talking about it. Maybe understand that an autistic individual cannot make eye contact because it is sensorially overwhelming. Maybe also understand that if you use a lot of jargon, a lot of idiomatic phrases when you talk as well, and flowery language, then the person, if your candidate is neurodivergent, they will not understand what you're saying, because it's unnecessary, stuff. If you speak directly, speak to the point, and speak in short, clear sentences so that the person at the receiving end knows exactly what you're on about. all of these things are practices that need to be incorporated in just an interview process. Imagine how many processes we have in a workplace. We have onboarding, we have continued career growth, we have so many things. And every aspect of every practice needs to be re-looked at with the lens of inclusion on. If we do not do that, we're automatically excluding a huge talent pool. Both in India, abroad, globally speaking, we're automatically excluding a huge talent pool just because our practices are unintentionally being, excluding neurodivergent individuals. I'm speaking, specifically with the neurodiversity lens and hat on. So every process needs to be re-looked at and sort of tweaked so that it becomes more neuro-inclusive. And that's when we talk practical strategies, we can keep talking about it. Every company sort of works in a slightly different way. The crucial part is having a culture that is inclusive. Because if you don't have an inclusive culture, these changes are not going to be sustainable. If you don't have things like an ERG, like employee resource groups that are dedicated, an employee resource group in an organization dedicated to neurodiversity, neurodivergence, and their allies. If you don't have something like that, again, sustaining a neurodiversity initiative in an organization becomes difficult because you can't just start something and let it go. You need to tend to it so that it can grow and flourish. And ERGs are the communities that really help sustain the growth of a neurodiversity initiative. And leaders should also be open to feedback. Where you should know what is not working, why it's not working, and then resolve to change it for the better. So there are lots of things that workplaces can do to be inclusive, but designing environments, like I mentioned earlier, with more biophilic elements, more natural elements, the lights, not having harsh fluorescent lighting, having options of quiet spaces where a neurodivergent employee can go retire into for a little while to sort of, get back. So many little things like that don't cost all that much, but they serve as accommodations and support for neurodivergent individuals. So they feel that the thing is, you get the opportunity to be productive in the way that best suits you if you have the accommodations and support that you need. And the most important thing I would like to say here is that these things should be completely universal. Like any employee, suppose you're trying to hire an employee. So I'm a candidate, sorry. So any candidate should be given the option to ask for certain things in advance, maybe ask for directions to that place, ask how many people will be questioning me, ask about what kind of questions will come in. Let's say, I'm just giving an example, or, keeping things flexible and open, having flexible work hours, having the option to go up to a manager and say, this is what is not working for me. I would need it changed. Could be saying that I just want some warm light in the area where I work, or can you move my desk to a place where there is less foot traffic, right? I do not want to sit by a window. Even small things like that make a huge impact, because if you have the right to ask for accommodations, you automatically feel heard. If there is somebody out there who is willing to listen to you and say, yes, this is something we can do for you, that gives you a sense of truly of belonging, that you are allowed to speak like that, that this is a sort of a family relationship where I can ask for support and receive it when I need it. So all of these things are important, and none of this is going to be possible without leadership support, without the culture. And it's on leadership to build that culture. It doesn't just happen organically. And all of these are long-term propositions. You can't say, I want to be a neuro-inclusive space and just expect that to happen in 6 months. It takes time. You have to root out biases and prejudices. There are so many implicit biases that we all carry around. So there is anti-bias training will help. So there are lots of things that need to be done. You need proper training, role-specific tactical training at different levels. For managers, you need to train buddies who are part of the neurodiversity initiative. You need to train the facility management people. everyone has to have education and training for any of this to work. So yeah.
Absolutely. And I feel like the same thing applies for education as well.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Same thing.
Um, what are the most common misconceptions about neuro-inclusion that you encounter?
I can tell you the most common misconceptions about neurodivergence, which then impacts neuro-inclusion. One is
Absolutely.
that neurodivergent individuals have low IQ, right? The truth is IQ and neurodivergence are not related. There may be neurodivergent individuals with low IQ, just like there are neurotypical individuals with low IQ. It is in no way connected. Of course, more exposure would develop more skills. That's a different matter. I'm just talking about IQ and the misconception around this, thinking that low IQ and neurodivergence is related. And there are so many other misconceptions that I've come across. One is that hiring a neurodivergent individual is an act of charity. They will never be like, I mean, someone has actually told this to me. They won't be like normal people. They will not be like anyone else. We have to, understand that they can never be that way, but we'll have to let it be. Meaning this is a complete sympathy pity operation, and it's got nothing to do with the skill of the individual. It's about our wonderful heart that we're hiring somebody whom we know is not capable. So that attitude is something that I found it very hard to even listen to, and it was because it takes a lot to break this kind of prejudicial thinking, right? So these kind of things are something that you would experience in workplaces in India when you're even trying to impact people's thinking, change the way people are thinking about neurodivergence. These misconceptions are huge roadblocks to that. Even something as simple as, like for instance, someone like my son, he processes things at a different pace. So if I ask him a question and he will take some time to respond, and I'm getting agitated if I keep on asking him that, come on, tell me now, tell me now, tell me now. Just imagine what he's going through. He just shuts down. He won't be able to answer. Whereas if I type it out to him in a message, whatever I ask my question, he responds immediately. Because you see, he doesn't have to deal with all of the other elements. He doesn't have to look at me. He doesn't have to listen to me. He sees the question, he understands it, he responds. Processing is different. But in a society where quickness is valued very, very highly, where the quicker you are, the smarter you are, right? And anything that's faster is considered better. In a society like that, taking time to process information or varying processing times because your brain wiring is different, that is considered to be not acceptable. If you're slow, you're also dumb. That is another misconception that I've come across. And these are real barriers to neuro-inclusion, because if this is what your manager or your colleagues think of you, then how inclusive will their mindset be? And these attitudinal barriers are the biggest barriers. We know that there are environmental barriers, there are social barriers, there's a lack of awareness barrier, but attitudinal barriers are deep-seated, and they take a lot of time to remove, like to be able to overcome those barriers.
How can communities take tangible steps towards fostering neurodiversity acceptance?
The thing that I would say the simplest way is just to keep an open mind, right? It's not just about being inclusive of neurodivergent individuals, just be inclusive in general. So if there is a cafe, or if there is a public space, if it can be accessible to all, if anybody is allowed to come and nobody is using a judgmental, sort of lens to interact with them, you're automatically inclusive. So if you have, let's say, a cafe come art space, and you actively do not discourage somebody from coming in there whom you think is different. In other words, since art is so accepting and you inclusive by itself, if that space is open to everybody, automatically become inclusive. So the idea is to be inclusive mentally first, and then to see what else can you put up in your space, so that somebody who is struggling with, let's say, sensory difficulties can also be comfortable in this space. So the first step is always just being mentally inclusive, and then we can take it from there. If it just means that you allow certain timings for neurodivergent individuals when the space is more empty so that it's quieter. If you cannot afford to have a separate quiet room, you can just change the timings, for instance. That helps. If when you go to like a movie theater to watch a movie, and in India, this is ridiculous. It happens all the time. You go to multiplexes and the movie doesn't start on time. So I've had one of my students before when I was in the NGO. He would get agitated because you know what? It's 7:01. It hasn't started, and then they say the movie will start at 7 and then it ends up starting at 7:18 or something like that. And our man has got a like full blown, he's in a really bad state because he's been waiting for 18 minutes without any information as to when the movie will start. So if our and a space is like, let's say in India, especially in India, I keep saying this, if you can just do things on time, that itself will help. I keep talking about this experience that I had with my son in Singapore. In Bangalore, my son cannot cross a street. He cannot cross a road by himself. He's 24 now and he can't do that because Bangalore follows no traffic rules. It is chaos on the road half the time. So how is he supposed to cross the road when um, there is no specific rule that I can give him? I can't tell him, look left, look right, look left and cross the road because things keep coming. Like there's no, you could, be hit by anything since people just, zoom, the speeds are not uniform, so many problems. But when he was 12 and we had gone to Singapore for a while, he adapted like a fish to water. He just loved that space because crossing the road just meant pressing a button and looking at, oh, there's the green light and the man walking, and so I can cross the road. It was simple. It was foolproof. There was no worry. There was even a countdown, right? So he knows how much time is left for him to cross the road. And he was independent in that activity. That helped him, cross the road without me. And that was a milestone for him, in terms of independence. He could just swipe his card and get onto a bus. He knew exactly which bus would come. And the timings were perfect in Singapore. It won't be late. They're really, really punctual. So it was easy for him. And these things that are convenient for everybody, an infrastructure that is actually convenient for everybody, is all that it takes. You just need to be universal in your thinking when it comes to designing spaces. How difficult is it to put a pedestrian, you know, that walking, whatever you call it, that. So how difficult is it to have that in a city like Bangalore, which calls itself, the Silicon Valley of India and all that? Why do I not see it here? And why should the environment disable my son to such an extent that he cannot cross a road? So looking at this, unless we really start thinking, and it's not just him, what about old people? Don't you think they would find it easier if elderly people would find it easier if there was some way to cross? I would find it easier to cross the road if there was just a button and I could press and get along. So all of these things that we're asking for, the simple support things, that is beneficial for everyone. Just like if you have a ramp, it not only helps a person who happens to be in a wheelchair, it can also help somebody who's pushing a stroller. It helps someone with arthritis too, because going up the steps is difficult. So you can see that just one solution benefits multiple people. So designing better public spaces, having better mechanisms for how to practice so many things in society, that by itself will be helpful, and you're automatically going to be more inclusive.
There is a few people that have wrote in. This is like a segment that we have for some of our podcast episodes, where people, put us, tell them about their real life situation, and people will usually provide advice or some words of guidance. This one is quite similar to what we just spoke about. Dear Amina, my 10-year-old autistic son has been having a tough time at school. Despite having an individualized education plan, IEP, the teachers don't seem to implement accommodations like sensory breaks or alternative ways of communicating. He's also being excluded from group activities because they say he doesn't fit in. It's heartbreaking to see him feeling isolated. I'm worried that speaking up might strain my relationship with the school staff or even backfire on him. How do I
Right.
assertively advocate for his needs while keeping a collaborative relationship with the school?
Yeah, that is a tough one because it also depends on how inclusive the school is, like how much do they believe in the principles that they possibly talk about, but I don't know how much is implemented on the ground. So one way to do this is to offer to talk to, or, to suggest that we have awareness sessions for the children, like interactive sessions for the children of this child's class, or, other children in the school, so that the idea of diversity first has to be implanted in minds of children. The idea that a child can be different and that is okay, and this child brings in this kind of, I mean, just having a group of very different people will open your mind to diversity and inclusion automatically, right? So the first suggestion I would have is ask the school authorities whether you can talk about it openly. This is what my child is going through. Oftentimes, when people understand what this experience is actually like, they can be more empathetic. Not knowing and just judging based on external behaviors, appearance, all of that is what gets us into all of these messy situations, right? I mean, this child is being isolated because the other children just, are seeing them as different. Whereas what should be is that the teacher takes some time out and tries to explain what this child is going through. So let's talk about the neurodivergent conditions. Let's use simple examples. Educate everybody around the child, because that will actually make a huge difference. If the other children know what we're talking about, then they can have a more positive view of neurodivergence. So that is one thing. And yes, of course, there is always a fear of, will my child be targeted if I complain? So let's not use a complaining or, a critical sort of an approach over here. Instead, we just talk about what all we can do together to make the space more inclusive. What can I do as a parent to make the space more inclusive? How can I help you make the classroom more inclusive? We know about universal design, mm, you know, um, when it comes to learning, universal design for learning. We know that multiple means of expression is an integral part of UDL. So request for that, request for other ways in which your child can show that they have learned the concept, other ways in which the child can express their understanding other than the traditional ways. So talk about UD. I mean, I'm sure the teachers are aware of that, but within the confines of UDL, which is a vast framework, there are many ways in which children who learn differently, who understand differently, can also contribute positively to the classroom and can show the teacher that their engagement was real and that their understanding of the concept is real. So yes, really, really ask for UDL, the UDL framework to be implemented in the classroom, and talk openly about neurodivergent conditions and challenges, educate everyone around the child, and I'm sure that you would see a difference fairly soon. But having open conversations about it um, is an absolute must right from the beginning.
Dear Amina, I've lost count of how many times strangers have stared, whispered, or even made rude comments when my 7-year-old son has a sensory meltdown in public. The worst was when somebody suggested I was a bad parent and needed to discipline him better. I feel torn between ignoring these remarks and wanting to educate people on autism. Got
Right.
to admit, sometimes I want to scream at them. How do you handle public judgment during challenging times? Is there a way to protect my son's dignity whilst also raising awareness?
It is really difficult. I totally understand where you're coming from. So it's very difficult when your child is having a meltdown to also keep your cool and stay a little bit detached so that you can present a very cool front to everybody around you. That is really, really difficult, if not impossible. But we are mothers, we can do it. My point I'm trying to say is that when your child is having a meltdown and you know that um, they need their time to recover. During that time, if people are staring, try and say, look, I need support in this. My child is going through a meltdown. He, they will get over it, but please don't stare. Please don't make it more difficult than it already is. I'm counting on your support to help us both get through this episode. Just speak from the heart. You don't have to have like a whole speech ready, but just tell the onlookers that if you can't help, please walk away. Please don't stare. It is very disrespectful for me and disrespectful towards my son, who cannot control the way he's feeling right now. So please help by either walking away or keeping a distance so that, it leaves me some space to help my child. Be firm. There is absolutely no one in the world who can understand better what you're going through. But if you are firm and you ask for respect, then that is one, I would say, very powerful way of getting your point across and getting support when you need it.
Dear Anima, I have two kids, my 12-year-old daughter and my 9-year-old autistic son. My son needs so much of my time and energy that my daughter started acting out, saying things like, "You care about him more than me." I've loved both of my children equally, but I can see why she feels neglected. I want to make sure she feels just as valued, but I'm so stretched thin that I don't know how to meet everybody's needs. How would you advise that I manage to ensure that my neurotypical child feels included and supported without compromising my autistic child's care?
Right. So I also have two children. I have a younger daughter who's currently in college. So this is a very painful topic. I myself have given so much importance to my elder child that the second one has felt neglected. Now, she was extremely understanding and all that, but I think it was when we watched the movie Wonder. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, and the sibling of the protagonist, the child who's the central character, says that he is the sun and we're all revolving around him, and there's no room in it for me. Right, that really hit me hard. And my daughter was much younger at that time, so I asked her, do you feel that way? Do you feel Amma only prioritizes, your brother and not you? And she told me very openly that sometimes I feel that way. So that hit me very hard. So I can understand where you're coming from. The one thing I would say is, yes, you need some help in this instance because you need to spend one-on-one time with your daughter. That is non-negotiable. Some time where that child feels that they have exclusive access to you. And for that, you need some support with your autistic child because unless you have someone to help you care, for your autistic child, you cannot give that one-on-one time and, attention to your other child. So I would suggest get some help for a couple of hours at least a week, and then assign a certain time, a certain time slot, I don't know, choose a day where you take your daughter out shopping, something, just some other daughter moments that she can hold on to when the rest of the day is difficult or the rest of the week is difficult. If you can carve out that time, I don't know the circumstances of your life, but if you can carve out that time, believe me, that will be very, very helpful. Because that will also give you a chance to have an open talk with your child to say that I love you just as much. I love you equally. Unfortunately, when there's so much of, there are so many challenges and there are so many needs that are coming at me, I have to prioritize differently. It doesn't mean I want to do it, but for a little while at least, this is what I have to do. So having clear communication like that, it allays your daughter's fears, it will allay your daughter's fears regarding how important, valuable, and crucial she is to your life. So make that one-on-one time happen, and surely you will see a difference.
So the next one says, My son is 6 years old, and our extended family often struggles with understanding his autism. I do understand they're from an older generation and was born in India. They expect him to behave like other kids, sometimes say things like, he'll grow out of it, or worse. They're just spoiling him. They don't see his strengths, like how incredible he is with puzzles or his amazing memory, and focus only on his challenges. Family gatherings are stressful because I feel like I'm constantly defending him or explaining his behaviour. How can I educate them in a way that helps them appreciate his unique qualities and create a more supportive environment for him?
What can I say? Creating awareness is when it comes to family members, again, it's not easy. Nothing about this is easy. But if we can, like, for instance, in my talk, my TEDx talk, I say that I am a really bad dancer, but I'm a great cook. I'm a very good writer. And I mean, you can give me something to analyze and learn, and I can do that like that in a snap. But I can't dance. I've got two left feet and I can't sing. And yet, if in a gathering you introduce me as someone who's a lousy singer and a bad dancer, you don't talk about all the other strengths that I have, people will view me as only that, right? So nobody on earth wants to be defined by what they can't do. And it is absolutely unfair that autistic individuals or neurodivergent individuals are most often defined by what they cannot do in the classroom and in workplaces, anywhere, in families. So your child is 6 years old, your son. There is, if anybody tells you that he's not behaving normally, or this is not how it is, or this is bad parenting, you have to reply back and say, he can do all of these things. He's a wonderful child. If all you can see are what he cannot do, like only the things that he cannot do, how would you like to be defined by that? You have to answer, you have to actually ask these difficult questions. Maybe have, take some time off and educate people individually on this, because obviously you cannot go around in a family function educating people like that. But take the time off. There will be just 4 or 5 key people who are doing this and who can actually then disseminate the positive information too if they want. So, identify those key people who are responsible for constantly, saying the same thing, that your son is like this, why are they behaving like this? Target them, educate only them first, and then tell them, how would you like to be defined like that? Turn the questions around to them. I mean, turn it around on them. There are many things that people are good at. There are also many things that people are not good at. You simply cannot always focus on the deficits, on the gaps. If you focus on the strengths, believe me, the deficits will get mitigated over time, because then the individual will grow in such a way that that is possible. But only focusing on deficits will never make an individual stronger in the long run. You know that, and you really need to communicate that to the people. And I'm pretty sure there'll be only a few people who are actually doing this, and the rest of your relatives or family members will fall in line when you can change the minds of these key people.
Our second last scenario, dear Nima, really wanted to create more happy memories with my 8-year-old autistic son, but outings often turn into disasters. Crowded places overwhelm him, and he gets frustrated when things don't go as expected. One time we tried a trip to the zoo, but he had a meltdown because it was too noisy. We had to leave early. I wanted to help him experience new things and have fun, but I don't know how to plan outings that are enjoyable for both of us. How do you prepare for social outings and handle unexpected challenges while keeping your son comfortable?
So in my son's case, he absolutely loved social outings. He loves trips. He loves traveling. He doesn't like sightseeing, and he doesn't like walking for too long. He seems to get tired, and he prefers to just, as he calls it, chill in his room. And he wants a good room. He wants good Wi-Fi, and he's happy. He's never want to go sightseeing. He loves to sit in the car and then look at a dam and then come back. That's it. I realized that that's how he likes things. So our vacations are tailored around that. If this is how he's comfortable, we tail the key fact, that the point I'm trying to say is, find out what your child is comfortable with. You know the triggers already. You know that noise, for instance, is triggering. Before you do something, do a sort of you do a check first. Go there first and just see what could the possible issues be, what could go wrong, and then create solutions for those scenarios. At the best possible thing is to involve him in the decision making and see what would you like to do. Once your child tells you what they want to do, then you go and check whether the facilities in that particular, I don't know, let's say he wants to go to a museum or something like that. See what the setup is like. Prepare him in advance. A lot of the times, if our children are prepared in advance with social stories, with detailed mapping out of we'll do this, then we'll do this, and we'll do this, and we'll do this, proper scheduling, a lot of comfort will be there already built in the child's mind because there's no uncertainty, there is no chaos. Believe me, the greatest problem that our children have is that they cannot make sense of this overwhelming world, right? So we need to sort of put a scaffolding of structure on this chaos because in their mind it is chaos, believe me, and then proceed. So if you want to have like trips which are less stressful for you and enjoyable for him, you need to do your homework. You know the triggers already. You just need to do a reconnaissance sort of a thing. You just go and see how that place is, what will work. You can even talk to the people over there and say that I would like to bring my child here. What options do I have in case he starts to get, in case he finds this a little bit overwhelming, what can I do? Can you support me with this? So do the homework first. Don't expose a child to completely new environments without doing the homework and without preparing the child. It's key to prepare the child. And, the more detailed the preparation and the plan and the imagery that you can give the child before you get there, the more successful your outing will be. So do try that.
Our last message is, Dear Anima, my 13-year-old son is incredibly bright. He loves technology and can build anything with Legos, but is struggling with anxiety and is hesitant to try new things. I'm worried about his transition to adulthood and want to help him become more independent while still respecting his boundaries and comfort zones. How do you encourage your child to build confidence, take on responsibility, and explore their interests without pushing them too far or triggering anxiety?
So anxiety is a given when you're a neurodivergent individual. It's going to be there. The reason being that if you don't fit in your environment, if you're not like everyone else and you know it, anxiety is going to be there. When things don't happen on time, you're going to be anxious. When people don't respond the way you think they will, you're going to be anxious. When you can't read body language, you're going to be anxious. So anxiety is a given. The thing is to be able to control it to an acceptable level. It's never going to go away. Now, when you say that you don't know exactly how to push your son or to what degree to push him, again, I would go back and say, what are the interests of your child? What does your son want to do? Use the interest as a gateway to explore broader concepts, broader perspectives, broader possibilities. But use the interests first, because that is what is going to comfort them in this journey. Like, let's say your child, like, I'll give you the example of my son. He was good at art. For many years, for 10 years, he was working with art. And then suddenly one day he says, I don't want to do this anymore. And he was so talented. And I was like, oh my God, now what do I do? And then I sat down and asked him, what do you want? He said, okay, I want to, he's always, ever since he was a child, he wanted to have a juice shop. I said, I can't set up a juice shop for you now. So what are the alternatives? So he said he would like to work, he wants to learn how to make coffee, different kinds of coffee, and serve it to customers. So we began by sort of teaching him the basics, but sending him to a cafe where they taught him the basics in a structured manner. And then now he's interning there, and now he's sort of working there part-time. So you have to grow this skill set in a specific way. For instance, my son started with black coffees. He got a certificate on that. Then he did white coffees. And then he said, okay, now I want to do, mocktails. So he started doing different kinds of drinks. And the aspect of learning and doing something he really liked excites him so much that he has to commute 1.5 hours each way in Bangalore's deplorable traffic. And yet he does that just because he wants, according to him, he says, I love saying service, please. So that excites him because he knows that, something that he's made is now going to be given to the customer, right? So the point I'm trying to make is the interests always have to be the first step. Once you identify the interests, you can then start exploring in a wider manner. And don't be afraid of pushing too much or pushing too little. Every parent is going to make mistakes. So you have to try and then, step back and then keep trying and stepping back and observe. I think the most important thing is to listen and observe. If you can make out, if you just observe your child, how happy they are or how happy they are not with a particular experience. And you have to build on that. If some experience makes your child happy, explore more in depth with that experience. If your child wants to, for instance, you said he's good at Legos, maybe, try. There are so many online programs for basic coding, right? Where they use logics to build building blocks, and then you solve problems with that. See if he's interested in that. There are so many opportunities now that that weren't there 20 years ago. And technology now is your best friend. So try and find out ways in which his interests can be developed. You can do it online, you can do it offline, but don't be afraid of, am I pushing too much? Am I not? Just observe your child to see whether you are pushing or not. When I say observe, I'm saying literally make notes. You can see whether after a particular experience, if he comes back home and he's cranky, he's irritable, and he's, you get into fights with him, you definitely know that experience isn't working for him. But you can also go back and find out whether the environment had other issues, other factors that were, gelling with him. So believe me, everybody makes mistakes along this way. Try everything, but try it in a very structured way so you can tick off what is working, what is not working. Then you start to identify a much clearer path for your child moving forward. And involve him in all aspects of the decision making. That will give your child a sense of control, which will bring down the anxiety. So try and work with that.
What would you give to parents who are just starting out with their children in the neurodivergent journey?
I would take a very deep breath, first of all. This is it's not a conventional journey, but if you separate your expectations out from the reality that this journey is going to be, it'll be far easier. As long as you don't expect your journey to be like the journey of every other parent on the planet, you're already in a better place. And listening and learning from your child is very crucial on this journey. There are many things that we are not aware that we carry within us. There's a lot of internalized bias, prejudice, and also ableism that we carry within us. We should let go of all of that if we want to stand a chance of understanding our child and helping them positively in their journey. So one of the key things that you need to do as a parent is introspect brutally and see whether it is your thoughts, beliefs, and prejudices that are holding your child back, because I've seen a lot of that happen as well. Yes, so be brutally honest with yourself. Your child will anyway be brutally honest with you. There is no doubt about that. And then look at this journey as more of an adventure where there'll be some hits and some misses. And making mistakes is not the end of the world, as long as you realize that you've made a mistake and then you improve upon your ability to deal with that particular situation. So constant learning, constant growing. And at the end of it, when I look back now and like I'm comfortable, my son is comfortable, but when I look back at how difficult it was the initial years, the first 13 years were really difficult. And then all I can tell anybody as a parent is that it gets better. The more you work on comprehension, the more you work on exposure to things that your child likes, enjoys, and then will grow to work with. The more you do all of these things, the better your end result will be. You look back and you think, it was so difficult, I thought there was no hope. But I'm here to tell you that there is hope. It does get better. And anything that you can do to increase your ward's chances of successfully integrating into the world around, not fitting in, but being able to be part of the world around him or her successfully. Whatever you can do to work towards that, that is something that you have to continue to do. And it is a rewarding journey at the end of it.
If you could enact one immediate change to promote neuro-inclusion globally, what would it be?
Change the education system everywhere. If I could do that, I would, because, you know, the most formative years of a child's life are spent in school, right? So many hours. And if the education system continues to be rigid and inflexible and only geared to a certain kind of brain, there is the challenge that our children face will never go away. So the first thing I would do is to change the education system, to make it flexible, to take it back. Like in India, we used to have what's called the Gurukul system in ancient times. You learn in nature, under the trees, and every child is being taught in a way that they can learn. You're not expecting all the children to learn in the same way. So that ancient Gurukul system, I feel, is far more beneficial than the imposed educational system that hit India later on. And even across the world, education systems do need to be more flexible. Without that, you really stand a chance to lose some of the brightest minds ever. I know that the neurodivergent individuals who are successful today, we know a lot of them innovators, scientists, we know celebrities, especially the dyslexic celebrities are very common. They've made their way through life despite the barriers, right? So it shouldn't be that difficult. And one of the primary barriers that I really wish to see broken is this barrier of rigid and inflexible education.
What inspired you to pursue this topic today on our podcast?
Always my inspiration is my son. I've seen with, I don't have the words to express it, but his longing to be part of something meaningful. And I've seen how many times he's just wanted a friend and he's never gotten it. I've seen how many times he's looked at me and said, can I come too? If I was going somewhere, if I was going out for lunch with friends or something. And those kind of simple but very painful questions, that would come my way. That is what made me want to fight for, what can you say? You just need everybody to see neurodivergent individuals in the way they would see anybody else. When your child, or my son is not a child anymore, when my son asks me, can I come too, because I don't have any friends of my own, right? So I need to join my mom. That is very hurtful. That is only because, not because he isn't trying. He tries every which way to have friends. But in a society where, neurotypical communication and neurodivergent communication is very different, making friends outside of your community is difficult. He has neurodivergent friends. Thankfully, he has a better social life now and all of that. But no individual should have to face isolation. No individual should be lonely. This earth is teeming with people. When we isolate someone wired differently, what does that say about us, as human beings? I feel that this is a very fundamental problem that needs to be addressed, which is why that is definitely the source of where my, advocacy, the fire of my advocacy, if you will, that's what fuels it.
Looking back on our conversation, what is the most important takeaway or message you want our audience to remember?
Well, it's the same message that I think I was harping on in my TEDx talk. I believe that neurodivergent individuals, that anybody with a different brain wiring, that put on this earth for a purpose. I believe that the strengths of our neurodivergent children, the strengths of neurodivergent people, are essential to keep humanity going. I want people to view neurodiversity is an all-encompassing thing. It's all of us, neurotypicals, neurodivergents, everybody coming together. So if we all work together, we augment each other's strengths, we mitigate each other's challenges, and we actually create a collective cognitive wealth for the entire world to rely on. That is a message that I would want people to, keep in their minds when they hear this. When that is a message I want them to take away from this conversation.
How do you hope this episode will impact or resonate with our listeners?
I do hope that it makes our listeners sort of open their eyes to the fact that there are, I would call it, a kind of invisible disability. Like 20% of the world is neurodivergent. There are people in your family, in your friend circle, in your social circle, in your work circle who are neurodivergent. You may not be aware of it. There are lots of things you can do in order to make the spaces that you are in and part of more inclusive. There is absolutely nothing that stops you from opening your hearts and minds to people to make just that little bit of difference in their lives.
Are there any upcoming projects, events, or resources you'd like to share with our audience?
I am speaking at the Mom Power event, it's an online talk happening 28th November. So that's one upcoming event. And from next month onwards, I'm actually going to be heading the neurodiversity department or division of a company. So that's a new, I wouldn't say project, but it's a change for me, which I hope to impact more people, more organizations, more minds with this opportunity that was presented to me. And yeah, that's it. If there is anybody wants to know more about neurodiversity, if you think their organization will benefit from awareness sessions, or your community would want to hear more about awareness, I mean, feel free to talk to me, contact me. I am happy to spread the word in any way I can.
Where can our listeners find you or connect with you to stay up to date with your work?
I am very active on LinkedIn, so all my projects and all that. I'm not good with Instagram, so I think I'm too old for that platform. But LinkedIn is where you can find me, and feel free to message me on there as well. With any queries, I'm happy to help at any time.
Perfect. Finally, what's one thing that you're grateful for today?
Grateful for today. I am grateful to have this opportunity to again talk about neurodiversity, because that is something that I want to continue to do, like I said. And I'm also grateful for the opportunity to be, able to sit here and be in a place where I can now, instead of focusing on whatever problems that I was facing, I can now actually, I've moved beyond that, and I'm able to help in whatever small way. I'm able to help and impact other people. So I feel very grateful for that.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming onto our podcast.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us today and diving into this inspiring conversation with Anima Nair. Her journey as a parent, advocate, and TEDx speaker has illuminated not just the challenges, also the incredible possibilities of embracing neurodiversity. From our personal experience to our professional expertise, Anima's story reminds us that inclusion is not just a value, it's a transformative force that benefits everyone. As we wrap up, let's reflect on the power of understanding and the impact we can create when we choose to build a world that celebrates every individual's unique strengths, whether it's through fostering inclusive workplaces, supporting neurodivergent individuals in our communities, or simply challenging the biases we internalize every small step of the way. Make sure to check out our show notes for links of Anima's TEDx talk and other resources to continue exploring the incredible world of neuro-inclusion. And if this conversation resonates with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening and stay iconic until next time.